Well, we made it to everyone's favorite passage in Revelation chapter 20, talking about the 1,000 years. So we're going to just talk a little bit more about that because I just didn't have time yesterday to dig into some of the intricacies of some of my position. So as I said yesterday, I'm historic or classical premillennial. Grew up after reading Left Behind and a lot of books like that on dispensational premill, which was kind of the steady stream that a lot of evangelicals were taught and trained in. As I shared yesterday, his amillennial was the predominant thought for most of church history, and postmillennialism today is seeing a bit of a resurgence, which to me is just odd. And if you want to talk more about that, we can. I just wanted to talk more about why I am not pre-tribulational rapture in my response to this. And a large part of it comes from my professor at seminary. So he was influenced. He did his master's degree at Trinity in Chicago, so he was influenced by Dr. D.A. Carson, who's another one that's very influential in my life and in my thinking. I just answered an email from someone that was asking some questions about this. Surprised that I was classical premillennial and thinking that I was amillennial. As I shared on Sunday, I am barely premillennial, but for me it's just the how do you interpret these 1,000 years, and I that's what kind of keeps me tethered back to that. So I just want to share a little bit. So the passages I mentioned yesterday, the rapture doesn't appear anywhere. The way we think of as the rapture doesn't appear anywhere in the book of Revelation. So what you have to do is you have to put together the whole host of what the Bible, the biblical passages say, referring to the end times. So you need to pick up some things from Daniel, from Ezekiel, from Isaiah, from what Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, from First Thessalonians. And so I'm just going to read what Blomberg says with some of my own comments. So I will try to make it clear where it's my words and not his. But First Thessalonians, the passage talks about we will meet the Lord in the air. And here's what he says about that. And this is it's a long quote, so I'm sorry, but I think it's helpful. He says, all believers alive on earth when Christ returns will be caught up together with those accompanying him to meet the Lord in the air, verses 16 to 17. This event has come to be called the rapture, from the Latin raptus, the noun derived from the verb for caught up. This is the only passage in Scripture that uses this particular imagery of being caught up in the air, although the same Greek verb, harpazo, appears in 2 Corinthians 12, 1 through 4, when Paul is caught up into the third heaven, either inside or outside the body he doesn't know. Theologians have extensively debated whether this is a separate event from Christ's visible bodily public return at the end of human history, because Scripture elsewhere seems to teach of a Great Tribulation immediately preceding Christ's return, for example, Matthew 24, 21 through 28, and Revelation 7:14. Interpreters have debated the relationship between the tribulation and the rapture, dividing themselves into pre-tribulational, mid-tribulational, and post-tribulational camps. Side note, I am post-tribulational, so I think Christians will be here throughout the entire tribulation. Now, I honestly would prefer pre-trib. Like, that would be a much safer and more comfortable, but I don't think God ultimately cares about our comfort. I think he cares about us being completely satisfied in him, and he has always left a remnant, a faithful remnant, in any context that he has existed. Anyway, back to Blomberg. Most everyone agrees, however, that no text of the Bible ever speaks of both tribulation and rapture at the same time. So theological synthesis of numerous texts are needed to come to conclusions. Now, I want to read the passage that he talks about here from Matthew 24, because this is another one that is often appealed to. So he talks about 21 through 28, which is not what I want to talk about. He does talk about the Great Tribulation there. I want to jump to no one knows the day or the hour. Verse 36, and this is one that is often, I'll start in verse 36. This is one that is often appealed to argue for pre-trib. Then we'll go back to Blomberg in a minute. Jesus says, concerning that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, except the Father alone. As the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know until the flood came and swept them all away. This is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding grain with a handmill, one will be taken and one left. Now, when I was growing up, I had heard that taught as that this taking away is referring to the rapture, where people will be living together and suddenly they'll disappear. And I don't think that's true based on the context. So he's talking about the marriage. Who's the ones who are swept away? It's judgment. So I would argue what Jesus is talking about when he's referring to one being left and one remaining is the positive is the one that is left. That's the one who is not swept away in judgment by the flood. So that's that passage, so I don't think that fits for a pre-tribulational position. Back to Blomberg. He says, it is interesting, however, to observe that the term used in this passage for meeting the Lord in the air, the Greek apontesis, is the same word that was often used for a welcome and escort provided for a returning king or visiting dignitary to an ancient Greco-Roman city. The two other appearances of this word in the New Testament match this usage exactly. In Matthew 25:6, the waiting bridesmaids wake up to meet and escort the bridegroom and his new wife to his parents' home where they will live together. In Acts 28:15, the Christians from Rome leave town to meet Paul on the highway and escort him back to their city. Likewise, here in 1 Thessalonians 4:17, the imagery suggests that the post-tribulational understanding of the rapture. Jesus is descending from heaven to earth at the second coming, and his followers form a welcoming party to meet him partway, and then escort him back to the earth in triumph. Interestingly, it is precisely post-tribulationalism here that best supports seeing Paul as premillennial. For why bring Christ back to earth unless to begin his earthly reign, which some Thessalonians feared for their deceased fellow Christians would miss. So that's why that's a large part of the reason that I would argue that and why I am still post-tribulational. Again, I'd prefer to be pre-tribulational just in terms of not having to work through or deal with the implications of this increasing persecution and difficulty. But I exegetically and hermeneutically just can't get to that position. So again, if you want to talk about any of this stuff, please reach out to me. If you are like just trying to figure out how to best make sense of or interpret this passage, it's really fresh in my mind. So I would love to sit down for a cup of coffee and talk to you about why I have made the interpretive decisions that I have. But at the end of this, what I want you to take away is what I said at the beginning of my sermon yesterday is this 1,000-year reign occurs 6 times in the entire Bible, and they're all in these verses. So don't make a bigger deal out of this than what it needs to be. The focus on this text, I would argue, is not on the 1,000 years, it's not on the army, and it's not on the battle. It is on Jesus and him alone. If we miss that, then we're going to miss the entire point of this passage, of the book of Revelation, of the entire scriptures, I would argue. The point is not to prepare for battle, it's to trust the victory that Jesus has already won. We're not supposed to be fearful and flee and run away. It's for us to trust in God and be faithful wherever it is that he has called and commissioned us to be and go. So with that said, that's Revelation 20. We're going to finish Revelation 20 this week, and I wanted to break this section up for 2 reasons. One is so we could have a week talking about the millennium, but the second one is this next passage is why I continue believing in eternal conscious punishment for unbelievers, which is not a super easy or light topic, but it's what we see throughout Scripture, I would argue. So we're going to be dealing with hell and the implications for unbelief this coming Sunday. Trying to think. Yeah, there's one note coming up. We have a prayer, praise, and pie night, which is something we do the Sunday before Thanksgiving. So I believe it's the 24th of November. Don't quote me on that, though. It's the last Sunday of the month, the Sunday before Thanksgiving. We'll have a prayer, praise, and pie night here at church. So would love to have you mark your calendars and join us for that. Lord willing, we'll see you on Sunday as we continue wrapping up Revelation 20 together.